For so many Jews on this side of history, like this has just been excruciating and confusing and challenging time. This part of me, this part of my culture, of my family that I've always had immense pride in, is being weaponized to defend a genocide objectively. And not only is it horrifying and terrifying, but it makes Jews more at risk. It makes anti-Semitism go up, not down. How dare you use my name to defend your positions on this, right? Like, it's shocking.
Hi, welcome to The Revolution. It's a show where we try to figure out what's going wrong in the country and fix it peacefully, non-violently. All right, now we are joined by Charlie Goldensohn, which is kind of a super badass name. The Goldensohn part, not the Charlie part. He's a fascinating character. Currently, he's advisor in office to the office of the CEO of Jose Andres Group. So that's a twist. Executive producer of paid media for Harris for President. Interesting. Special assistant to the chief of staff for the office of the First Lady, Dr. Jill Biden. Also digital director for Jill Biden, research fellow for Gavin Newsom, constituent service representative for Dianne Feinstein. Fascinating resume there, Charlie. How you doing, brother?
I'm good, man. Thanks for having me. I think Charlie is a pretty badass name too, though. I'll say that.
Charlie is a fun name. It is. I know a couple of Charlies, and it's fun every time. So I'll give that to you. Way better than Charles. So I agree that Charlie's the right way to go.
Charles is my legal name, but I've never gone by it. So
yeah, Charles feels British. Charlie feels American.
I agree.
All right. So your resume indicates establishment dude 101. So what happened? Because I've seen your videos and you sound like a progressive populist now. So, so what was your experience like inside the machine?
Yeah, I mean, I'll say like it's funny you say that. I was talking about with my dad the other day. Exactly that. My whole career has been, for the most part, basically within the upper echelons / like highest levels of the Democratic machine. But my background and where I come from has always become hyper progressive. I would say socialist adjacent. The family I grew up in is very progressive. My dad was a Marxist activist. My mom, ran Planned Parenthood. So my whole childhood and upbringing was always hyper progressive, and so were my politics. And I'll just add that, not to blow smoke, but the Young Turks, when I was in college, I graduated in 2016, which is the same time as when Bernie was running his first presidential. Like the Young Turks were a extremely important piece of my own political, not just awakening, but bringing me into the political arena. I didn't plan on working in politics. My family had always been hyper political, but I never thought of it as a career. And kind of the combination of Bernie running with my own, me finding TYT and really understanding and finding what I felt like was a digital progressive media community, like that is what brought me into politics in the first place. So that all being said, the first job I got out of college was a staffer for Dianne Feinstein. Obviously not a progressive icon necessarily, but as a 22-year-old kid looking for a foot into the political space, especially while at that time Trump was running, that was like a dream opportunity. And I grew up in San Francisco too. That's the other thing. I'm a local kid from San Francisco. Dianne Feinstein was always like, and remained kind of like the mayor of San Francisco, even when she was long past her city hall. And that's really what got me in the door into that establishment space. When Dianne Feinstein decided to run again, when she was close to 90, that's when I decided to leave. And where I went from there was to Los Angeles, because I really understood when I was in the Senate, again, TYT being a significant portion of this, learning that Senate staffers, congressional staffers are paid a tiny amount of money, and therefore the predominant, kind of power players and folks in the ears of these decision makers tend to be really young staffers. And where are those staffers getting their media? They're not necessarily reading the New York Times or the Examiner. They're watching videos on YouTube, on Facebook video. They're consuming content from TYT. They're consuming content from Vice, now this. Attention, ATTN. And so I ended up actually moving down to LA because I was really interested in that. I wanted to understand, how can you create media, progressive leaning media, that really shapes the understandings of the decision makers guiding the decision makers. And so again, though, when I was in LA, the folks that we were working with at Attention, I ended up being like functionally the chief of staff at Attention. I kind of like ran the political arm there after 3 years. We were working with all of the presidential candidates. This was in the 2020 primaries, Democratic primaries. We had Biden's team coming to us. We had Bernie's team coming to us. We had Warren's team coming to us. We had Yang's team coming to us. We had Booker's team coming to us. Klobuchar, Hickenlooper, like everybody. And so I just, even though my own personal politics were very lefty, professionally, I was being plugged in to kind of advise and write and produce for these very establishment, more liberal candidates. And the Bidens actually asked me to leave that job to come be a digital director for them. This was during the primaries, and I turned them down because I was a Bernie Sanders supporter. I was volunteering every weekend. I was knocking doors for him. I was always kind of jealous because we got to touch Bernie at Attention, but we never really got to help as much as I wanted to, because frankly, his campaign knew what they were doing. They didn't need our help compared to a lot of the other establishment candidates. So I didn't get to work with them as much. So I turned Biden down. He wasn't my horse, right? I thought he was going to lose. I wanted Bernie. But they ended up coming back to me after that Super Tuesday, after Bernie lost and after Biden won the primary, and said, what about now? And at that point, I felt like, you know what, screw it. All hands on deck to beat a fascist. Like, I'll absolutely come do this. And so that's when I kind of entered the Biden orbit, which was a completely new chapter in the establishment realm of politics.
So Charlie, let's pause there for a sec. So first of all, thank you for what you said about the network. I appreciate it. And it's, we get a lot of heat here, right? And so it's nice to hear every once in a while that we do something positive in the world. I appreciate you. Okay, so now you dealt with the Feinstein. You were relatively, new staffer, young guy, etc. Now you go to work for Jill Biden at the White House. Now this is serious stuff now. So I'm super curious, what was your experience inside that machine?
Yeah, so the majority of my time was on the campaign and on the transition. And the timing of that was, like I said, I came in after the primaries, right after the primaries. So I came in after all the, after all of the dollars from all the other Democratic candidates started to come together behind the Bidens. Like, that's right when I joined. And that timing also lined up with COVID, which was, I moved to Philly at first thinking I was going to be based in Philly because that's where campaign HQ was. But very quickly, a week in, as I was still isolating for COVID, they called me and said, change of plans, like, you're moving to Delaware and you're going to be in the nucleus of this campaign. Meaning, at that point, there were maybe thousands of staffers on the campaign. I'm not quite sure what the number was, but there was 11 of us, I think roughly 11 of us, who were basically chosen to live in almost like a guest house of the Bidens off their property, but very close by. And we became kind of the core nucleus of the traveling staff for the Bidens. I was on Dr. Biden's team. I was running her digital programming, content, messaging, brand, et cetera. There was another kind of travel unit for the vice president at the time, Joe Biden. And so, to be honest, my experience was not like a traditional campaign experience, because it wasn't just me going into HQ every day and churning workout. I was like, we all had to wear all these different hats because of COVID. So my job was, of course, running her digital stuff, but it was also, walking her dogs and hanging out with them at their Delaware house while it rained, having a bottle of wine and talking about what the transition was going to be. So it was a combination of like insanity, sprinting around the country every day, 18-hour days, but also like extremely personal, also getting to know that family very well. And I'd say, like, to answer your question more specifically, again, my relationship with Joe Biden was he probably knew my face. I was around his house all the time, right? He would give me a huh. That's how he would kind of acknowledge me. I don't think he knew my name, but Dr. Biden and I were very close, super close. And so it was a very personal relationship. Yeah. And I think what always surprised me about her the most, frankly, again, just being transparent, was like, with him, I always felt like it was very clear who he was. It was very clear that this is somebody who had been in a position of power and basically removed from the real world for 40 years. Like he respectfully hadn't touched grass in a long time. Dr. Biden didn't feel that way to me. She felt like a human being, somebody could introduce to me as her mother or her aunt. And I'd say that makes complete sense. So that was my kind of relationship there. And then we won, moved into the transition, got into the White House. I was in the White House pretty briefly. I left pretty early on. It just wasn't really for me. That, again, my goal in joining the campaign was not to be a White House staffer. My goal in joining that campaign was to beat Trump. And so once I got in there, it was an amazing opportunity, an amazing place to be. But there was a lot of people in there who had spent their whole careers trying to get there. And that just wasn't me. My goal was never to make it to the White House. And my politics didn't really align either. So it was an amazing experience that I was grateful for. It was an insane look inside the machine. I still, benefit professionally from being in that still. But I kind of got in there and got out of there. Yeah.
So Charlie, you had a kind of a unique experience there because you're mainly on the campaign, so you're not going to get to see much of the nitty gritty of the legislating, right, and the policy, and that's where we have most of the issues, right? So between that and your experience in Kamala Harris, so one last thing here, did you get any sense of like the, for lack of a better word, and since you had a personal relationship, it's really tough because I bet, on a personal level, it'd be so weird to be inauthentic, right? But like my number one issue with establishment Democrats is that I don't think that they mean anything. Like they don't mean a word of it. They don't want to pass minimum wage increase. They don't want to pass paid family leave. They don't want to pass any of these bills. That's why they never try, right? So from your experience, and I'm not trying to put words in your mouth because you might not have seen any of that, right? Yeah. But did you get any sense of that inauthenticity or no?
Yeah, I mean, yes. Though I would base that less off of like my time in the White House was so brief. I don't want to I don't know, right? I was in the East Wing. I was like not dealing with policy. I just wasn't. However, I spent a lot of time with them. I spent time on the Kamala Harris campaign as a senior advisor for paid media. What I can tell you is like, and maybe this is a transition to the campaign stuff, is like the inauthenticity is real, but I think so much of that is driven by the consultant class, right? Like so much of that, especially with these older establishment Democrats who have just been in this machine forever. And I'm not justifying it or excusing that behavior, but the reality is so many of these people and these principals have surrounded themselves with loyalists for so long who, for the most part, have made their careers off of paid media buys, right? Like they don't even understand the media ecosystem that they exist in anymore. And they're wealthy, they're elitist, and they also haven't touched grass. So I think one of the problems is this kind of like snowballing effect of not only are these politicians starting off as somewhat inauthentic, wishy-washy, no real policy agenda to begin with, but a lot of them were also surrounding themselves with consultants and advisors who were always guiding them right back to the middle, right? And because these people had only been in that space for so long, they didn't know any better. They didn't know who else to go to, or they didn't trust them, or the voices who were telling them to move in a certain direction, which frankly, like that was my job, right? Like that's how I always viewed myself, was like I got into this space and I was the one always screaming and yelling and trying to drag people in my direction. We were never the most senior people in the rooms, right? Or we were made fun of or laughed at it or told that our opinions were a joke, or that's why I'm the California kid and not the DC kid. So yeah, I think there's a ton of inauthenticity there, but I think it's layered, right? It doesn't just come from them being disconnected. It's also kind of the infrastructure that they built around themselves that just perpetuates that inauthenticity.
Yeah, it's so interesting. Okay, so now you're out in the non-political world to some degree, but you're making videos, and I want to show one of them because they're fun, they're interesting. I think you're good at it. So you made one about Sarah Hurwitz. So for folks who might not remember that name, we covered her a couple of days ago or at the end of last week, and she's the one that worked, I believe, in the Obama administration and came out and said we might have taught the wrong lessons about the Holocaust, because now people are saying, well, it was like weak, emaciated Jews who were being killed by the strong Nazis, but now we have the strong Israelis, killing the weak, emaciated Palestinians. And well, you got the wrong lesson. You should kill them. It's like, what? That's wow, right? She didn't say literally you should kill them, but that was clearly where she was driving with it, that we should not judge Israel for doing similar things. Anyway, here's a video that Charlie made about it.
So that's Sarah Hurwitz. She's a former speechwriter for Michelle Obama, and I'm going to try to be kind here. I really am. Please ignore this out of my nose. There's 1,000 things wrong with what she says in that video. I think we can all agree on that. It's kind of terrifying and scary and horrifying and disgusting what she says. But I want to focus on one thing, and that's this. Look at this message that I got in response to me sharing that video on my story. Okay? Take a look. Now, I responded to this person and said, Zionists, you meant Zionists. And the person said, oh my God, you're right, I'm so sorry. But here's the thing, I can't actually blame that person. I can't blame that person for getting it wrong, because that's what happens when people, specifically Zionists, use Judaism as a defense for genocide.
So Charlie, you said there something that I've been alluding to for a long time on the show, which is stop equating Jews with Israel. You're doing so much damage. But I'm not Jewish, you are, so you speak with more authority in that regard, I guess. I mean, that's how we play this game. So Charlie, what do you think of? Elaborate more on what Sarah said and why you think it's damage.
Yeah, well, I'll say quickly, just take one step back. I want to be clear, I am actually still in politics. I still work as a political consultant and advisor to candidates and organizations. So I just want to put that out there. The content is kind of downstream from that. The content started as me being furious with our inability to message properly, me just feeling like, all right, I'll try doing this myself. So that being said, yeah, I mean, I think like I'm a Jew. I grew up in a Jewish family. We are not the most religious. For us, Judaism is hyper cultural. My grandfather was the lead psychiatrist at the Nuremberg trials. Like, we were deeply connected to the Holocaust. We have deep understanding of what genocide means and what it looks like. For me, Judaism was always deeply tied to a culture of fighting back against oppression, of standing up when things are unjust. And so from the get-go in the last 3 years, this is, for so many Jews on this side of history, like, this has just been excruciating and confusing and challenging time, especially when, I've never personally, especially as like a, at least white appearing dude, I've never had to really deal with issues around my race or my sexuality or my religion, even being Jewish. It's never been an issue. And for the first time, having to really feel like, okay, this part of me, this part of my culture, of my family that I've always had immense pride in, is being weaponized to defend a genocide objectively. This is something that has been stated by some of the most professional and verified organizations around the world, is horrifying and terrifying. And not only is it horrifying and terrifying, but it makes Jews more at risk. It makes anti-Semitism go up, not down, in my view. I think it is impossible to say that, there is rising anti-Semitism in this country. That is a fact that cannot be argued. However, I also think you can't say that is probably has some connection to the atrocities that the government of Israel is committing, right? And when they are using the religion of Judaism to defend those atrocities. And so I just feel like, I have a bit of a platform. I'm confident in my opinion. I'm not scared to hold back. Like, I'm happy to call people out on this right now, because especially, you probably couldn't see it in the video, but what I was showing was a message I got of somebody that responded to me trying to be positive, saying, oh, well, now the Jews are blaming the Holocaust, blah, blah, blah. And I had to say to them, no, this isn't Jews. This Zionists, in my view, are doing this. And they're like, oh, right, I'm so sorry. And so of course it's confusing for people. Of course people are struggling to understand the difference between Zionism and Judaism when there are people like Sarah, former Obama admin staffers, on stage saying this stuff over and over and over. And it's only dangerous for everybody. It doesn't help anyone.
Yeah, I feel like the only people that are saying what Israel's doing equals all Jews are either the Groypers on the right, or the Israel First guys that are like, yeah, no, let's hide behind, let's use Jews as human shields. Don't Don't.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, I think about the ADL. I think about Jonathan Greenblatt, where I'm like, how dare you use my name to defend your positions on this, right? Like, it's shocking. They go, the ADL, for folks who haven't seen this, probably many of your listeners have. A couple of weeks ago, after Zohran won, right? Like, they put out like a public tracker to track like all of the like, I don't know. I remember exactly what it was like. The dangers or risks, policy risks that Zohran and his team were putting out that would put New York Jews at risk. Well, like, you know what they haven't built trackers for? Are like the shit that Nick Fuentes says about Jews or Tucker Carlson. They've never made any trackers for that. And this is a Jewish organization. So yeah, I'm totally with you. It's ridiculous.
I mean, Jonathan Greenblatt defended Elon Musk after Elon Musk did what I hope was a trolling. I mean, weird to attach the word hope to anything he did in that regard, but that trolling like Nazi salute that he did, right? And he's like, oh, it's fine, it's fine. You're pro-Israel? Totally fine, totally fine. No, you're missing the frickin' point. Anyways, but one more question about that, Charlie, because I think it's so important. There seems to be a kind of an age divide now in the Jewish community in America, where I saw in one of the polls 2/3 of young Jewish voters in New York were voting for Zohran. And by the way, a huge percentage overall of Jewish Americans were voting for Zohran in New York. But yes, some of the older folks are still attached to Israel and think Israel can do no wrong. So how's that going? Because I'm not inside that community, so I only know it through friends.
Yeah, so I would say the first thing that comes to mind with that, and I would say like I used to live in DC. Obviously, I've been living in New York the last 5 years. So my family, my dad is from New York. My family is still on the Upper West Side. Like, we are a Jewish New York family. We're okay. We're safe. That's the first thing I'll say. The second thing I'll say is, I think that you cannot have this conversation about the Jewish voter turnout numbers in the New York mayoral election without also talking about the insane, bigoted, paid advertising campaign that the Cuomo team put out in that last 2-month sprint. Right? Like, they were dumping tens of millions of dollars in both campaign money and super PAC money into literally, of course, calling Zohran a jihadist and whatever else they want to call them, but literally targeting New York Jews, specifically elder Jews, telling them specifically, this man is a danger to your friggin' life, right? And I think that was effective. Like, I think that was very effective. And so I just think that like it's not just about Israel. This isn't just about entrenched feelings of Jews in New York or older Jews, or, as Sarah Hurwitz says, the TikTokification of media consumption and our access to like videos of genocide. It's also about people like Jonathan Greenblatt. It's also about people like Andrew Cuomo and his consultants who are actively choosing to pour gasoline on the fire of the fears of older Jews who are rightfully nervous, right? Like, nobody should say that you shouldn't be nervous about rising anti-Semitism, but when you're getting hit over and over and over with TV ads and YouTube pre-roll ads telling you that the mayor of New York is going to bring another 9/11 and this time it's going to be focused on Jews, of course that's going to have impact, right? So I just think that like that has to be talked about when we talk about the turnout numbers of this election, because I think Cuomo and his team did serious political, social, and like moral damage that now it falls on Zohran's team and his administration to kind of clean up.
Yeah, but how about on Israel? Is there the divide that I'm seeing through friends and family between the young and the old?
Generationally? Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I mean, I don't have the numbers in front of me. I'd say like anecdotally, it absolutely feels that way. Totally. I mean, I grew up in a family that was like my immediate family were, frankly, like, I grew up very aware of what Israel was doing. I don't know if we would call ourselves anti-Zionist, but maybe we would call ourselves an anti-Zionist family always. So I feel like I always was on the side and aware of this. But I also have family members who are on the other side. That being said, the majority of my Jewish friends are absolutely on the side that I'm on. There's a few outliers here and there, but yeah, anecdotally from my own perspective, I think it is. And I think to Sarah Hurwitz's point, which again is the Obama speechwriter, she's right about one thing, which is that because of TikTok or YouTube or Meta or whatever, that young people are having more access to the visuals, not just the visuals of genocide that Israel is unleashing on the people of Palestine, but also to independent media, to independent voices. What I would disagree with Sarah is that she blames TikTok for that instead of blaming Israel, right? Like in my mind, digital media has democratized media. And of course, social media has a lot of problems. I'm not arguing that. There's a lot of negatives here too. But on the positive side, it has democratized media so that young people who are on social media have more access to the world around them and are not as prone maybe to the pre-generational propaganda that our parents or grandparents were consuming.
Yeah.
And so yeah, and we know, there's organizing happening online. There's organizing happening on TikTok and on Instagram, on et cetera. So I think there is a generational divide, and I think it absolutely has to do with the type of access and the imagery and the information sharing that younger generations have access to now.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it's not about just Jewish community; it's every community.
Totally.
So when you talk about like the Turkish community, is there, as you put it, it's a really interesting phrase you use: generational propaganda. Absolutely. And the older generation grew up on propaganda. So they literally think that that's the truth. I mean, to the point where I've told the story many times on the air. When I was in Turkey, Charlie, I grew up there until I was 8. They taught us that the Turks had never lost a war other than World War I. And as a kid, I internalized that and I really believed that. And I was in college and I read this story of a battle of many, right? That the Turks lost. And I was like, that can't be true because the Turks have never. And then I paused, I was like, oh my God, that was such obvious propaganda, right? But you don't know that if that's all you've ever learned, right? So you're 100% right about TikTok, and everything else is actually showing you the reality instead of the propaganda.
If I could say one thing really quickly to that, like I have to, like, I also, and again, I don't view it as an excuse or justification, but like there is people who grew up in hyper-Zionist communities or synagogues. Like, I do think there needs to be some, now I understand that we're many years late to this, so I'm not saying they need this amount of time, but like, I think people outside that world don't quite understand the programming that's happening, right? And therefore like the deprogramming that's required for a lot of people in those communities. And I think it's easier for younger people to do that because they've spent less time on it. But like for older generations, it's not just that they've been consuming media, it's that their entire communities and for many people, their entire systems of faith have been consumed by this worldview too. And it's hard to deprogram that, right? It's a lifetime of learning, try to kind of like take away. So yeah.
No, Charlie, yeah, I couldn't agree more. Let me double down again with the example of the Turkish community, right? So like when you tell Turks that about the Armenian genocide, they're not going to believe you under any circumstance because their entire life, not just their education, but their community and their culture was the Armenian genocide didn't happen. And it's funny you mentioned it today because it triggered for me the thought. I remember we were taught that the Armenians, because this was a quote taken from an American colonel, which I realized later probably got contracts from the Turkish or Ottoman government later, right? And why he wrote this absurd thing. He wrote that the Armenians had returned fat and entirely unmassacred. And earlier today on the Young Turks, we covered a story of Dave Rubin talking about how the Palestinians were entirely unmassacred and were even fat. So it's like the same exact thing, both about genocides. And when it's like your own identity, people get dug in, and unfortunately, the older they are, not all the time at all, but overall, generally and on average, they get dug in more. And so it isn't about Jewish folks, it isn't about Turkish folks, it isn't about any race or religion. These are governments do wrong actions, and we have to have the courage to call them out. So I love that you do that, Charlie. All right, but before we let you go, Charlie, the show is The Revolution. So do you think that we need a political revolution? And what do you think is the one thing that you would do if you think we need one? If you could, right? That would make the difference in getting our democracy back and getting the government to represent us.
That's loaded. I think we need a political revolution. What I would say, and this is me putting on like operative strategist hat and digital media professional hat, is what I would do is if I could flip a switch, it would be to flip the switch so that donors and donors, but everyone, voters, et cetera, had a overnight understanding of the digital media ecosystem that we are up against on the right. I don't think people quite understand the scale of the project that the conservative movement has built specifically online and in new media over the last decade. Obviously, TYT was very early to this, but you guys were ahead of the game, and unfortunately, most just did not follow in time, as you know. And so for me, it's less, I think I could talk about 1,000 policy changes I would like, or organizational differences I would like, but for me, it's actually about media infrastructure. I think where we are losing objectively is that we can't get our message out to enough people. Sometimes the message is actually correct. Sometimes I would argue it is right, but we are failing to reach people where they are, and that is not just because our messengers aren't the best, which they aren't. We need much better messengers too, but it's also because we have not had proper investment in digital media infrastructure like the conservatives had over the last decade. And I think until that we get that kind of investment and that kind of project built, we are going to continue to not see the kind of strides that we want, because we will not be able to get our message to reach the people that we desperately need.
And do you think we've particularly failed in reaching young men?
Of course, yes. Objectively, yeah.
So,
yeah, I mean, we could do a 24-hour episode on that. Yeah.
And so, I mean, look, obviously Democrats do relatively well with women for understandable reasons. They're for equal rights, they're for the right to control your own body, et cetera. Spend a lot of time and energy in that direction for logical reasons, to make sure that no one's rights are taken away, right?
Yeah.
But it feels like the Democratic Party forgot about men. And so I guess since this is also in your field of expertise, so one more question then. What's your suggestion for how's the best way to get them back?
Again, I'll go backwards and forwards. I'll give a just medium answer, which is the whole reason I started making these videos was because when I got off the Kamala campaign and I wanted to, the last 3 weeks of the Kamala campaign, I was losing my mind. I was grateful to be there. I'm so glad I was there, but I could not believe, and it wasn't just me, that, to give credit to a lot of people in there. There was a lot of people in there who were pulling their hair out and saying, we can't believe what's going on here for 1,000 reasons. But one of them was messaging, content, paid media, creative, and how we were talking to men. The reason I started making videos was because when I got off of that campaign, I was asked to speak in a lot of panels. I was going to a lot of events. I was in 1,000 meetings. And frankly, I was almost always the only straight guy or straight white guy in those panels or in those meetings, which is fine. However, what I realized quickly was people were asking me for my opinion because I was the dude who liked to focus on talking to men and trying to get men back. And then I would give my ideas, which were very simple, which was just talk to them like humans, find messengers and use messengers that are authentic and actually speak to their everyday needs. We don't need to focus on sports betting. We don't need to focus on pornography. We can focus on the economic populist issues that are affecting every other demo, but we need to meet them where we are. And after I felt like I had 6 months of these conversations and nothing was happening, that's why I started yelling into my phone and recording it, because I felt like if nobody else is going to just do this, let me try. And my page is Shay Chuck, if folks want to look it up. I think one of the reasons it blew up so quickly was because there just is not a lot of guys who look like me talking about progressive issues and trying to break it down with an aim of talking to other men. There's a few really great guys out there like Josh Doss and Good Trouble and of course Hassan, but we are not busting at the seams with options for these kind of dudes talking about this stuff. So it's a simplified answer, but we just got to talk to men like humans. We can't try to cater our messaging to be about sports and make it funny and beer and drink. Just be a guy who talks to guys about the issues they care about, reach them where they are, and you'll start to get them back. That's my view.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Absolutely right. Okay, Charlie, tell folks where they can follow you one more time.
Totally. My handle is Shay or Ches Chuck, as you see it down there. You can find me on Instagram or TikTok. I know it says Twitter there, but I actually don't think my Twitter's up to date. So follow me on Instagram, TikTok. you'll see it's a lot of political, it's me breaking down politics, it's me ranting about everything that we're seeing at the national level, state level, local level. And yeah, I really enjoy it. I hope you guys follow me and like my content. And I appreciate, Cenk, I really appreciate you having me on. This was great. Again, I said to some folks before this was a bit of a full circle moment. Like I cannot emphasize enough how pivotal TYT was in my own political awakening in college. So this is awesome.
That's awesome. I appreciate you saying that, Charlie. And I love your videos. Everybody check out Charlie's videos. They're great, they're funny, they're smart. Charlie Goldensohn, thanks for joining us, brother. We appreciate it.
Awesome. Thanks, Cenk. Appreciate it.